I was standing in the boardroom on the 40th floor when I saw them. Through the glass walls, I watched as a family walked through the main entrance of my hospital. My hospital. The woman had the same sharp chin, the same way of looking down at people. The man beside her walked with that familiar arrogance. And between them, looking older but still with those same eyes, was him. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? The last time they saw me, I was wearing scrubs 2 sizes too big, my hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, my hands raw from washing them 100 times a day. The last time they saw me, I was nobody. Just a nurse. Just someone not worthy of their son. I'm Rachel, and this is my story. Not the story they thought I'd have. Not the story they wanted for me. This is the story of how I went from being told I wasn't good enough to owning the very ground they now walked on. And I need to tell you everything, because the journey from that humiliating dinner to this moment took everything I had. It broke me. It rebuilt me. And it taught me that sometimes the people who try to destroy you are actually showing you exactly who you need to become. It started 7 years ago. I was 28, working night shifts at County General, and I loved my job. I really did. People think nursing is just about following doctor's orders and checking vital signs, but it's so much more than that. You're there in the moments that matter. You're there when someone takes their last breath. You're there when a mother holds her baby for the first time. You're there at 3 a.m. when a patient is scared and alone and just needs someone to hold their hand. I was good at it. More than good. I cared about every single person who came through those doors, and I think they felt it. I wasn't in it for recognition or praise. I was in it because I genuinely wanted to help people heal. That's where I met Daniel. He came in with his sister who had appendicitis. It was a routine case, but he was worried sick about her. I remember he kept asking questions, wanting to understand every detail of the procedure, every medication we were giving her. Most family members either trust you completely or doubt everything you say. Daniel was different. He asked questions because he wanted to learn, not because he didn't trust us. After his sister's surgery, he waited in the recovery area, and we talked for hours. He asked me about my job, about why I became a nurse, about what it was like to work nights, and I asked him about his work. He was a financial advisor at some big firm downtown. Honestly, I didn't really understand what that meant, but he seemed passionate about it. We started dating 3 weeks later. He would pick me up after my shifts, even if it was 6 a.m. and he had work at 8. We'd get breakfast at this little diner near the hospital, and he'd be in his suit already, and I'd be exhausted in my scrubs, and we'd just talk. About everything. About nothing. He made me laugh. He made me feel like what I did mattered. When I'd tell him stories about patients, he'd listen like they were the most important things in the world. He never once made me feel small for being a nurse. Never once suggested I should want something more or something different. He loved that I loved my job. For 8 months, everything was perfect. We moved in together. His apartment was nice, way nicer than the tiny studio I'd been renting near the hospital. He insisted on being closer to my work so I wouldn't have such a long commute. On my days off, we'd cook together, watch movies, just be together. He talked about the future, about us, about maybe getting married someday, having kids. I started to believe in it, in us, in the life we were building. Then he said his parents wanted to meet me. He'd mentioned me to them, and they wanted to have dinner, a formal dinner at their house. He told me not to worry, that they'd love me, that I should just be myself. So I went shopping for a nice dress. Nothing too fancy, but something appropriate for meeting your boyfriend's parents. Something that said, I'm respectful, I'm serious about your son, I'm a good person. I spent half a week's pay on that dress. I got my hair done. I practiced what I'd say. I was nervous, sure, but I was also excited. I thought this was the next step. I thought this meant we were getting serious, that he was serious about us. Their house was in Riverside Estates. I'd driven through that neighborhood before, but never actually been inside one of the houses. Everything was big. The gates, the lawn, the fountain in the driveway, the front door. Daniel squeezed my hand as we walked up to the entrance, and he whispered that everything would be fine. His mother opened the door. Margaret. She was wearing pearls and a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked at me the way you look at something you stepped in on the sidewalk. Her smile was tight and didn't reach her eyes. She said hello and welcome, in a voice that meant neither of those things. His father, Robert, was in the living room with a glass of something amber. He shook my hand with 2 fingers, barely making contact, like he was afraid I might be contagious. Dinner was already awkward, but I tried. I really tried. I asked them about their work. Robert owned a chain of medical supply companies. Margaret was on the boards of 3 different charities. They asked me what I did, and when I said I was a nurse, the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Margaret's smile got even tighter. She asked which hospital, and when I said County General, she actually winced, like I'd told her I worked at a sewage plant. Robert asked what my plans were, and I didn't understand the question at first. Plans for what? For my career, he clarified. Did I plan to go back to school? Become a doctor, maybe? Or perhaps a nurse practitioner at least? I explained that I loved being a nurse, that I was good at it, that I found it fulfilling and meaningful. The look they exchanged with each other made my stomach hurt. Margaret set down her fork and said, in this sweet voice that was full of poison, that it was wonderful I had such a caring heart. But surely I understood that nursing was more of a stepping stone than a career. A way to put yourself through medical school, perhaps. Or to meet a doctor to marry. She actually said that. She said maybe I'd meet a nice doctor at County General and that would solve everything. Daniel's hand tightened on his fork, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. Robert joined in. He said that in their family they valued ambition. They valued people who wanted to excel, to rise above, to become leaders. He said it like I was none of those things. Like putting on scrubs every day and holding someone's hand while they died wasn't leadership. Like advocating for patients and catching medical errors before they hurt someone wasn't excellence. Margaret added that they'd always hoped Daniel would end up with someone who matched his level, someone who moved in the same circles, someone who could be an asset to his career, not a liability, someone worthy of him. I felt like I'd been slapped. Actually, a slap might have hurt less. This was calculated. This was designed to make me feel small, and it worked. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to tell them they were wrong. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said, very quietly, that I was a wonderful person and very good at my job. That was it. That was all he said. Not that he loved me. Not that their opinion didn't matter. Not that I was enough exactly as I was. Just that I was wonderful and good at my job. Like I was a pet he was fond of. Margaret pressed on. She said they needed to be realistic. Daniel had a bright future. He was being considered for partner at his firm. He would need a wife who could host dinner parties for clients, who could make conversation with investors, who understood that world. A wife from the right background, with the right education, from the right family. She said all of this while looking directly at me, making sure I understood that I was none of those things. I was from the wrong background. I had the wrong education. I was from the wrong family. I was wrong. Everything about me was wrong. Robert said they weren't trying to be cruel. They were being honest. They were thinking about Daniel's future, about what was best for him. And what was best for him wasn't me. A nurse from County General with no family money, no connections, no status. I was holding him back, they said. If I really cared about him, I'd let him go. I'd understand that love wasn't enough, that sometimes loving someone meant stepping aside so they could have the life they deserved. I remember my hands were shaking. I remember feeling like the room was spinning. I remember looking at Daniel one more time, giving him one last chance to say something, anything, to tell them they were wrong, to choose me. But he just stared at his plate, his face red, his jaw tight. He was embarrassed. Not of them. Of me. He was embarrassed of me. That's when I knew it was over. Not because his parents hated me, but because he didn't fight for me. He didn't think I was worth fighting for. I stood up. My legs felt like water, but I stood up. I said thank you for dinner, in a voice that didn't sound like mine. Margaret looked relieved. Robert nodded like I'd finally understood something important. Daniel finally looked at me, and there was something like regret in his eyes. But it was too late. Way too late. I walked out of that house, down that long driveway, past that stupid fountain. I didn't have my car because Daniel had driven us there. I walked to the main road and called a taxi. I sat on the curb in my expensive dress and waited. Daniel didn't come after me. He didn't call. He didn't text. He stayed in that house with his parents, and that told me everything I needed to know. He came back to the apartment 3 days later to get his things. He said he was sorry. He said his parents just wanted what was best for him. He said maybe they were right. Maybe we were too different. Maybe it wouldn't work long term. He said all of this while packing his clothes, not looking at me, He said maybe we'd both be happier with people more suited to our lifestyles. I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I just watched him pack and leave. Then I locked the door, slid down to the floor, and cried for 3 hours straight. The next few months were dark, really dark. I threw myself into work because it was the only place I felt like I mattered. But even there, things started to feel different. I'd hear doctors talking about their stock portfolios or their vacation homes, and I'd remember Robert and Margaret's faces. I'd see nurses dating doctors, and I'd remember Margaret's comment about marrying up. I started to feel ashamed of what I did, and I hated that. I hated that they'd gotten into my head. I hated that they'd made me question the work I loved. I was working a night shift about 4 months after the breakup, when something changed. We had a patient come in, a teenager who'd been in a car accident. He was in bad shape. The doctors were scrambling, ordering tests, calling for surgery. His mother was in the waiting room, hysterical. I stayed with her. I held her hand. I explained everything that was happening in words she could understand. I got her water, tissues, a blanket when she was shaking. I sat with her for 6 hours while they operated on her son. When the surgeon finally came out and said her son would be okay, she collapsed in my arms, sobbing. She held on to me and said thank you over and over. She said I'd kept her sane through the worst night of her life. She said I was an angel. Something clicked in my head that night. This was my value. This was my worth. Not impressing people at dinner parties. Not having the right last name or the right connections. But being there for people when they needed someone most. This mattered. What I did mattered. And I was done letting anyone make me feel like it didn't. But I also realized something else. I was tired of being powerless. I was tired of being at the bottom of the hierarchy, of having no voice in how things were run. County General was understaffed, underfunded, poorly managed. Nurses were overworked and underpaid. Patients weren't getting the care they deserved because the administration cared more about budgets than people. I started paying attention to how the hospital operated. I started asking questions. How were decisions made? Who made them? Where did the money go? Why were we always short on supplies? Why couldn't we hire more staff? Why did the good nurses keep leaving for other hospitals? I started taking classes. Business classes. Healthcare administration. Finance. I'd work my shifts at the hospital, then go to classes in the morning before sleeping for a few hours and starting all over again. It was brutal. I was exhausted all the time, but I was driven by something bigger than tiredness. I was driven by anger, by that dinner, by the way they'd looked at me, by the way Daniel hadn't defended me, by the belief that I wasn't enough. I wanted to prove them wrong, but more than that, I wanted to build something that mattered, something that showed that caring about people and being successful weren't opposite things. 2 years later, I had my degree in healthcare administration. I applied for an administrative position at County General, and got it. I was suddenly sitting in meetings with the people who made decisions, and I saw exactly how broken the system was. The hospital was hemorrhaging money because of poor management. They were cutting corners on patient care to save money, which led to complications, which led to lawsuits, which cost even more money. They were losing good staff because they refused to pay competitive wages. They were losing patients because their reputation was terrible. It was a death spiral, and nobody seemed to know how to stop it. I had ideas. I had lots of ideas, but nobody wanted to hear them from me. I was too young, too inexperienced, too new to administration. Never mind that I'd worked on the floors for years and actually understood what patients and staff needed. Never mind that I'd studied this, that I had a degree, that my ideas made financial and operational sense. They smiled and nodded and ignored everything I said. So I left. I took a job at a private hospital across town. Better pay, better title, more responsibility. I spent 3 years there learning everything I could about hospital operations, finance, negotiations with insurance companies, regulatory compliance, hiring and retention, quality metrics. I made connections. I learned who the good doctors were, the ones who actually cared about patients. I learned who the good nurses were. I learned which medical supply companies were reliable. I learned which insurance companies were nightmares. I learned how to read financial statements, how to identify inefficiencies, how to cut costs without cutting quality. And I saved money. Every penny I could. I lived in a tiny apartment. I drove an old car. I didn't go out, didn't take vacations, Didn't buy anything I didn't absolutely need, because I had a plan. A crazy, impossible plan. I wanted to open my own hospital. Not a big one. Not at first. A small community hospital. Somewhere people could get good care without being treated like numbers. Somewhere nurses were valued and paid well. Somewhere patients mattered more than profit margins. Everyone I told thought I was insane. You need millions to open a hospital. You need investors. You need connections. You need experience. You need all the things I didn't have. But I started anyway. I found a closed medical facility on the edge of town. It had been a small community hospital that shut down 5 years earlier. The building was in decent shape but needed work. I met with the owners and negotiated a lease with an option to buy. I used every penny of my savings for the down payment and first few months of rent. Then I started calling people. Doctors I'd worked with who were frustrated with the hospitals they were at. Nurses who were burned out and undervalued. I pitched them on something different. A hospital where clinical decisions were made by clinicians, not administrators worried about quarterly profits. Where nurses had a say in protocols. Where doctors weren't pressured to rush through patients. Where quality of care was the priority. Some people thought I was crazy, but some people listened. Some people were as tired as I was of a broken system. Some people wanted to be part of something better. We opened with 12 beds and a skeleton staff. It was chaos at first. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Equipment broke. We had issues with our licensing. Insurance companies didn't want to work with us because we were new and unproven. We almost went under in the first 6 months. I was working 100-hour weeks, doing everything from mopping floors to negotiating with vendors to covering shifts when we were short-staffed. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating right. I was running on caffeine and stubbornness. But slowly, very slowly, things started to turn around. We got our first good outcome on a complicated case. The patient told their friends. Those friends came to us. We got a few positive reviews online. More patients came. We hired more staff. We expanded to 20 beds, then 30. Word started to spread that we were different, that we actually cared, that our nurses spent time with patients, that our doctors listened, that we didn't rush people out the door. Insurance companies started to notice our outcomes. We had lower complication rates than the big hospitals, lower readmission rates, higher patient satisfaction scores. We were doing something right. They started to work with us, and that brought in more patients. We were finally making enough money to not just survive, but to grow. I reinvested everything back into the hospital. Better equipment, more staff, higher wages to attract the best people. We expanded to 50 beds, then 75. 5 years after we opened, we were the fastest growing hospital in the region. We'd gone from 12 beds and a handful of staff to 200 beds and over 500 employees. We'd opened a second location. We were recruiting top specialists. We'd become known for our cardiac unit, our orthopedics program, our maternity ward. Patients were choosing us over the big established hospitals, and we were profitable, really profitable, because it turns out that when you take good care of people, when you have happy staff who do good work, when you focus on quality, the money follows. But I wasn't satisfied. County General, where I'd started, was failing. It had gotten worse over the years. They'd had multiple scandals, safety violations, complaints. They were on the verge of losing their accreditation. The county was looking to sell it or shut it down. When I heard that, something stirred in me. I wanted it. Not for revenge, though that was part of it, but because I knew I could fix it. I knew I could turn it into what it should have been all along. I put together an acquisition proposal. It was aggressive. The county wanted someone to take over the hospital, assume the debt, keep it operating. I offered to do all of that, but on my terms. I'd restructure everything, bring in my team, run it my way. The county was desperate enough to say yes. 6 months later, County General became part of my network. I walked back into that hospital, not as a nurse in scrubs, but as the owner, the woman who ran the place. The transformation took 2 years. It was harder than starting from scratch because I had to change an existing culture, let go of people who weren't willing to change, and rebuild trust with a community that had been let down. But we did it. County General went from being the hospital people avoided to being the hospital people requested. We updated equipment, renovated facilities, hired new staff, implemented new protocols, and it worked. I kept expanding. I bought 2 more struggling hospitals and turned them around. I built a new flagship facility downtown, a state-of-the-art hospital with the best technology, the best doctors, the best care. It became the biggest and most advanced hospital in the city. Insurance companies now wanted to partner with us because we had the best outcomes. Doctors wanted to work for us because we gave them the resources and time to actually practice medicine. Patients wanted to come to us because they knew they'd be treated like human beings. Last year, we generated over $800 million in revenue. We employed over 3,000 people. We'd treated over 200,000 patients. We'd become the largest private hospital network in the state. I'd built something that mattered, something that was making a real difference in people's lives. And I'd done it by staying true to what I believed in from the start, that caring for people and being successful weren't opposites. They were partners, which brings me back to that moment. Standing in my boardroom on the 40th floor of my flagship hospital, looking down at Margaret, Robert, and Daniel walking through the entrance. They were there because Robert needed a specialized cardiac procedure. They'd tried 2 other hospitals, but the wait times were too long, and the quality reviews weren't good enough. So they came to us, to my hospital, the one owned by the nurse who wasn't worthy of their son. I went down to meet them, not because I had to. I have administrators who handle patient intake, but I wanted to. I needed to. I walked into the consultation room where they were waiting. Margaret saw me first. She looked confused, probably wondering why someone in a business suit was walking into their consult. Then recognition hit. Her face went white. Robert's mouth actually fell open. Daniel stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. I smiled, a real smile. Not because I was happy to see them, but because I was happy with who I'd become. I introduced myself as the owner and CEO of the hospital network. I said I understood Robert was here for a consultation about his cardiac issues. I wanted to personally assure them that he'd receive excellent care. We had the best cardiac team in the state, the best equipment, the best outcomes. He was in good hands. Margaret couldn't speak. Robert was turning red. Daniel was just staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. I told them their consultation would be with Dr. Harrison, our head of cardiology, and that he'd be with them shortly. I excused myself and walked toward the door. Then Daniel found his voice. He said my name, just my name, like a question. I turned back. He asked how this was possible, how I'd gone from being a nurse to owning hospitals. I could have said so many things. I could have thrown that dinner back in their faces. I could have told them exactly what their words had done to me. I could have made them feel as small as they'd made me feel, but I didn't, because I realized something in that moment. Their opinion of me didn't matter anymore. It hadn't mattered for years. I hadn't built all of this to prove them wrong. I'd built it to prove myself right. I told Daniel the truth. I said that after that dinner, I realized I had 2 choices. I could accept their version of who I was, or I could decide for myself. I chose to decide for myself. I chose to turn anger into fuel. I chose to take every doubt they'd planted in my head and use it to push myself further. I chose to build something that mattered, something that helped people, something that proved that success and compassion weren't enemies. Margaret finally spoke. She said, in a shaky voice, that they'd just been trying to protect their son, that they'd wanted what was best for him. I nodded. I said I understood. And then I said that if they'd taken the time to actually know me, they would have realized I wanted the same thing. I would have been good for Daniel. I would have supported him, pushed him, stood by him. But it didn't matter now. I was good for myself. I'd built a life I was proud of. I'd helped thousands of people. I'd created jobs. I'd changed healthcare in this city. And I'd done it all without their approval, or their son. Robert asked if I was going to refuse to treat him, if this was revenge. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I told him that I became a nurse, because I believed everyone deserved good medical care, regardless of who they were or how they'd treated me. That belief hadn't changed. He'd get the same excellent care we gave everyone, because that's who I was. That's who I'd always been, the kind of person who helps people even when they don't deserve it. I left them there and went back to my office. I didn't watch the rest of their visit. I didn't ask for updates on Robert's treatment. I just went back to work, because I had a hospital to run. I had patients who needed care. I had staff who depended on me. I had a mission that was bigger than old wounds and petty revenge. Daniel tried to contact me a few days later. He wanted to talk, to apologize, to explain. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. He'd made his choice 7 years ago, and I'd made mine. His choice had been to let me go without a fight. My choice had been to fight for myself harder than anyone ever had. His choice had kept him exactly where he was. My choice had transformed my entire life. I heard later that Margaret told people at her charity functions about her encounter with me, how shocked she was, how she couldn't believe it, how she never would have guessed. I heard she said it with something like regret in her voice, like she was realizing what they'd let slip away, like she was understanding that they'd been wrong about me. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if people like that ever really change their minds, or if they just adjust their opinions when the facts become impossible to ignore. I do know that Robert got excellent care at my hospital. His procedure went perfectly. He recovered well. They sent a thank you card to the hospital afterward. It was addressed to me personally. It said they were grateful for the care and professionalism. It was signed by all 3 of them. I kept it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of where I started and where I ended up, a reminder that other people's limitations don't have to be yours. Looking back now, I can almost thank them. Almost. Because that dinner, as painful as it was, showed me something I needed to see. It showed me that I'd been playing small. I'd been comfortable being a nurse, being good at my job, being helpful, but I hadn't been thinking bigger. I hadn't been pushing myself. I hadn't been considering what else I could do, what else I could become. Their rejection forced me to ask bigger questions, to want bigger things, to believe I was capable of bigger achievements. I'm not saying you need someone to tear you down to build yourself up, but I am saying that sometimes the people who hurt you are actually giving you information. They're showing you their limits, their fears, their smallness, and you get to decide if those limits apply to you. You get to decide if their fear becomes your ceiling or your floor. You get to decide if their smallness makes you shrink or expand. I chose to expand. I chose to take every ounce of pain from that night and forge it into something useful, something powerful, something that changed lives. Not just my life, but thousands of lives. Every patient who gets better care because I built these hospitals. Every nurse who feels valued because I created a place where they're respected. Every doctor who can practice medicine the right way because I gave them the space to do it. That's what came from that dinner. That's what came from being told I wasn't enough. So if you're going through something similar, if someone has told you that you're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, I want you to hear this. They're wrong. They're wrong about you. They're wrong about what you're capable of. They're wrong about your limits. But them being wrong isn't enough. You have to know they're wrong. You have to believe it in your bones. And then you have to go out and prove it. Not to them. They don't matter. Prove it to yourself. Take the anger. Take the hurt. Take the rejection. And turn it into fuel. Turn it into determination. Turn it into a reason to wake up every morning and push yourself further. Turn it into something so big and so beautiful that years from now when they see what you've built, they won't believe it. They won't believe you did it. But you'll know. You'll know exactly how you did it. You'll know that every step you took, every late night, every moment you wanted to give up but didn't, was because someone told you that you couldn't, and you decided to show them what couldn't looks like. I still work in healthcare. I still help people heal. That hasn't changed. What changed was the scale. What changed was the impact. What changed was my understanding of my own worth. I'm not just a nurse anymore, though I'll always be a nurse at heart. I'm a CEO. I'm a leader. I'm someone who changed an industry. And I did it by staying true to what mattered most, caring for people, while refusing to let anyone define my limits. If you're watching this and you're feeling stuck, feeling small, feeling like you're not enough, I need you to do something. I need you to subscribe to this channel, because I'm going to keep telling you stories like this. Stories about pain and power. Stories about people who were told they couldn't and did anyway. Stories that remind you that your current situation isn't your final destination. Hit that subscribe button right now. Leave me a comment telling me your story, telling me what you're building, what you're fighting for. And then watch the next video because there's another story there that you need to hear. Another reminder that you're capable of more than anyone ever told you. Another push to keep going when it gets hard. Because it will get hard, but you're harder. You're stronger. You're more than they said you were. So subscribe, comment, watch the next video, And then go out there and build something so incredible that years from now, they won't believe it was you. But you'll know. You'll always know.